Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody joining us from across the globe. This is No Summary, conversations with artists that don't fit in a box. We are Golden Thread Productions. For those who may not know, Golden Thread is the first American theater company focused on the Middle East, and we are based in San Francisco. It's my pleasure today to join four fabulous playwrights of Arab heritage who we just had the honor of commissioning to create new work. They are Hassan Abdulrazzak, Hannah Khalil, joining us from the UK, Tariq Hamami, and Mona Mansour, joining us from the US in New York. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to start by asking you identity questions. Oh dear. So I'm curious to hear from you how your background noise. How your Middle Eastern or Arab heritage has influenced your writing, your work. Whoever wants to start first.
I guess I can dive in. So my name is Tariq Hamami. My background is I'm Algerian American, and I guess the way that my background has influenced my work is because I always kind of feel like I'm, in two worlds, that of being in America and that of where I was born and where I come from in Algeria. And so, and also trying to hold on to that identity, because I feel like, especially from non-Arab people, they'll say, oh, you don't look Arab, and so they won't know that I am. And so I've always felt this need to let people know, to really hold on to that. And so I think a lot of my writing has been influenced by that, of people trying to hold on to who they are, figure out who they are, or define who they are as a person as well. And also the fact that I was raised in a dual religious house, my dad being Muslim and my mom being Catholic. I think my writing is always focused around faith in some way, and not specific religion, but just that idea of faith, and how do you find faith meaningful, specific to you, when there's so many different ideas around. And so I think that's kind of influenced my writing as I've grown as a writer.
Thanks. Hannah, you want to go next?
Sure. So I am half Palestinian, half Irish, and I was brought up in the Middle East as a child in Dubai. And then my parents separated when I was a teenager. And I came to London, and I was with my Irish mum, and I still saw my dad frequently, but I didn't go to Palestine after I was 11. And I was I didn't feel part of a sort of Arab community or diaspora. And then in my early 20s, I started writing plays, and I always wrote Arab characters because I felt so frustrated with the way Arab characters were portrayed, often on telly and in the theatre. And so I was trying to redress that balance, but I was also sort of trying to learn more about my own heritage. And through that kind of process of beginning to write plays about my heritage, I reconnected with it in this really beautiful way. And I met and sort of became part of this wonderful growing diaspora of Arab artists in London and more widely the UK. And so, yeah, the first play I wrote about Palestine, Plan D, was really sort of important to me, because it was terrifying. I was really scared to write about such a huge subject, but then it felt really like the right thing to do. And now I don't seem to be able to write about anything else, which is, problematic, because the Irish side are getting annoyed. Yeah, so that's me.
Mona?
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. I'm the only one wearing these monstrosities. I would just echo what Tariq and Hannah have said, that feeling of being like half, I mean, I'm born and raised in America, but my dad came from Lebanon in the late 50s. And where I grew up in Southern California, my dad was sort of the first person from his village to come to the States. And so when the war happened, many of our cousins came to live with us. And so I always say it was like the Middle East kind of came to our house. So it is interesting. And to hear you talk about that, Hannah, about kind of when you started to write into that, whatever that is, that identity, because I don't think I had a palpable sense of it until I started to write my own material. Like I was an actor before. But when I look back, like the first complete thing that I wrote that wasn't a sketch, that wasn't like sketch comedy, was a play called Me in the SLA. And it was about my obsession with Patricia Hearst, who, I don't know if anybody knows who it was, but, who was kidnapped and blah, blah, blah. But it was like the SLA, which also was the Southern Lebanese Army. And so I brought into this whole sort of notion of like, how at the end of the day, it was my desire to be really American, and not just American, but to be like one of the gold chip families of America. Like I didn't want to be middle class, and I certainly didn't want to be like Arab middle class. And I guess the last thing I'll say right now is that I moved to New York a year after 9/11. And at that time, there was so much going on. There was a community that was beginning to coalesce. So there was a company called Nebras, and out of that, I think Noor came, and the Lark started to have things go on, and that's really been a joy to see that grow. And part of the reason it grows is because stuff's happening, like bad things are happening. But the flip side is we get to be in conversation and to talk about things that we probably didn't talk about before.
Thanks, Mona. Hassan?
Hello, everybody. My name is Hassan Abdulrazzak. I'm a playwright originally from Iraq. And I grew up in a little bit in Iraq until the age of 8. And I left and moved around in Egypt, in Algeria as well, and to the United Kingdom. And when I arrived in the United Kingdom, I had this sort of Arab makeup in my blood, and I had family connections, but I wanted to really integrate. I wanted to become sort of part of the British society. And I didn't really think, I avoided thinking about the politics of the Middle East and so on. This was something like my dad and his generation did, and I wanted to be kind of different from that. But circumstances forced the identity in a way upon me. The first was the first Gulf War. And suddenly I was at university, and everybody around me, the student union, were talking about Saddam Hussein and Iraq, and as if everybody was an expert. And it felt really, really frustrating when I was watching my country suffering in that first Gulf War. And people, like my frustration of the people's lack of basic understanding that Iraq was not at all about Saddam Hussein. And that was really implanted, the first sort of impulse to try and create stories that explain who I am and what my people are like and what I know about Iraqis. But really, probably what cemented it for me was I went to the States in 2011, and I worked in Boston, and just when 9/11 happened. And I had a group of Arab friends. I was working as a scientist. My background is not really literature, it's more science, my academic background. And there we really became kind of very closely together, and we started talking about politics all the time and about Arab identity. And it was the first time I read Edward Said, and it politicized me, obviously, 9/11. And it was very difficult to be in America at that time. I had in my neighborhood trucks driving by going with a slogan, "Death to all Muslims now," and I will never forget that. It's kind of emblazoned on my memory. So when I went back to England, I had this desire to write, and I went and I saw plays about Iraq, and I knew the Iraq war was going to happen even before it happened. And then I saw these plays about Iraq, and written by English playwrights and American playwrights, and it really frustrated me. And that was my incentive to write my first play, which was Baghdad Wedding, and to try and give voice to the truth about Arabs as I knew it.
Thanks, Hassan. It's interesting because I come from Iran, and I come also from a Muslim Christian background, and I had to move to the US because of the Iranian Revolution, or stay in the US because of the revolution in Iran in 1979. And I feel like our lives are so impacted by politics that the I don't know, the ambivalence that we encounter in the US, and I don't know if it's the same in the UK or not, the ambivalence towards politics really bothered me. I remember during the hostage crisis, Iran was on the news every night. You know, the reports of the hostages were every, like, day 1, day 30, day whatever. But people in my neighborhood, I think there was only one family in my neighborhood who actually knew where Iran was. Nobody knew where the country was, what language people speak, or what the revolution is about, or what is going on, what the US has done there. So there is this urge, I feel, that we all share to tell our stories. And I wonder, Hannah, you talked about, you know, your Irish side is now gonna, you know, want to be represented. And Mona, I know in your trilogy, you have kind of mapped out your family history, both your mother's side and your dad's side, right? And I wonder, yeah, what is that urge to, like, do justice to the complexity and the many layers that we carry? Because I feel like I'm constantly in a position of correcting people. We are not just this, we're not just that, especially, you know, as a woman from the Middle East. And I wonder if any of you have, or Hannah and Mona, just because I mentioned your plays, if you have something to add.
Sure. I very much like echo everything that you said, Taranj, and it's really, for me, a lot of it's about, there's a fine line, because you don't want to write history lessons. That's not our job as artists. We it's not our job to educate people in a sort of, you know, in an academic kind of way. And sometimes people see my plays and they're like, but I didn't find out enough about the history. And I'm like, there's this thing called Google, feel free, you know, like, you can find out if you really want to find out. It's more a provocation, but also about demystifying, and sort of, it's that I'm sure we've all felt like we don't, I want to see the people that I know on stage, the Arabs I know, like, and we're talking about sort of also about, I think it's important to talk about Islam and about Muslims, and you know, I talk about this so much to people who are Christian, because like many of you, I'm also, you know, I have Catholicism on one side and I have Islam on the other side. And in any portrayals of Christianity, people are allowed to have different degrees of commitment to their faith, aren't they? You know, you can be a Christian who's a very, very dedicated Christian and who goes to church every Sunday, or you can be someone who just prays occasionally. But that's not allowed if you're a Muslim, and you're not allowed to have an ongoing negotiation or conversation with your faith if you're a Muslim. And so I think just showing people those possibilities, because everything's always so binary, is really, really important. And I feel like the responsibility is more to about humanizing and saying, look, we're all the same, really, aren't we? You know, we're all just human beings, and with different experiences. Have a look, open the door, look in the door and see, this is the house, these are the conversations we have. It's not so different. And as a way of kind of opening the door for people to then take responsibility to go and find out more. And as you say, Taranj, like to find out what's going on in these places that you have an opinion about, but you don't really know anything about.
Yeah, I hearing you say Iraq, Hassan, is like, I don't want to say music to my ears, but I've heard people talk about Iraq. And I'm like, if you don't know how to fucking pronounce it, then don't talk to me about what we should be doing over there. Just to clarify, like so the trilogy is about, you know, a fictitious Palestinian scholar and kind of these two ways his life could go. So just to be super clear, you know, my dad's Lebanese, and while almost an atheist, you know, is Christian. And so I didn't know I would be writing that trilogy. I mean, it was a completely unwise decision, right? Like so many things we do in the arts, like you're just like, wait, how did but I had written the first play, Urge for Going, which is now the third play in the trilogy. But I really wrote that just to sort of say, I wanted to sort of interrogate the place my father came from, and specifically his village, which is called Miyumiye, and it's in the south, and it's near Sidon. And when you tell people that your family's from Miyumiye, they go, oh, we were at the camp. Like they assume they're from the camp. They actually don't realize that there's like a village there. And so when I was growing up, it was, you know, I would say the notion of Palestine was in my home, and not in an academic way, and not in a particularly a way that I would appreciate now, but it sort of made me want to look at that. So I just wanted to clarify that. But the interesting thing, I think, at least doing this in the States, is that our community, right? So like in the trilogy itself, I have two actors who are Palestinian. I also have an Iranian actress, and I have someone who is, I think Nadine Malouf is like Italian and Lebanese, and Caitlin Cassidy is like Syrian and Irish. There's a lot of us who are just these mixes of things. And so we sort of, what am I trying to say? I think we sort of bring that confrontation that we've had with both sides, we sort of bring it into the room, if that makes sense. And it creates a sort of energy that you might not have, right? If you did it in the country where it was set. But that thing about wanting to correct people, and I totally echo what you're saying, Taraj, and Hannah, that thing too of like, I've had people say the same thing. Like, well, wait a minute, I wanted to know more. And it's this, yeah, it's a play. And moreover, you know, it's not an NGO. Like if it does open up hearts and minds, I mean, I don't know why we would be doing this if we didn't want to do that. But to say, well, I hope to get 200 more signatures or something that's an actionable item, I'm not writing those. I mean, people can, but that's not where I'm at. I sort of want to unsettle people too, just like any theatrical experience.
Speaking of where we're at, oh, Tariq, did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to add in there, I think part of the thing that draws us to tell like our stories is also this, I feel like there's no greater, or just there's nothing more sad than when people aren't known, you know? Like for instance, when I was growing up and people would ask, oh, that's an interesting name, where are you from? I would say, I'm from Algeria. And at first they'd say, oh, Nigeria? So no, Algeria. And they would never heard of it.
I get Palestine. I say Palestine. They say, "Oh, Pakistan." And I'm like, no.
Yeah, no, two different places. And then they'll say, "Oh, I'd never heard of that country before," and it's the largest country in Africa. You know, so so this idea of not even knowing that our people exist, and then even on top of that, the struggles that are faced. Like I wrote a play about the Algerian Civil War, and part of the reason I wrote is because no one knew it happened. And so all of these people suffered, all these people died, and especially in the United States, if you would mention Algerian Civil War, people would say, oh, I didn't even know that happened there. So I think there's a lot of North African and Middle Eastern, like, not even history, because, you know, like you said, we don't want to write a history lesson, but just knowing that that there's struggle and that there's triumph and that there's people there, not just from what you see on your 90-second clip on the news every night. I think that's a driving force.
You're all, you have established careers as playwrights. Some of you also teach. So I'm curious, what did you have lined up before the pandemic hit? And I guess that's the first part of the question. And then the second part is, and how did the pandemic change, and what did you end up working on? Maybe we'll let Hassan start.
Oh yeah.
I was asked to write, which I would still love to do, but although the centenary has passed, but there was the centenary of the Iraq 1920 revolution, which was an uprising that happened in Iraq. It started mainly in the south of Iraq against the British colonial powers. And I was being asked to do that as a project for the Bradford Literary Festival, and then of course COVID happened, and it didn't happen. But I'm still reading about that revolution, and maybe it's something I would sort of come back to it, because there are, in Iraq history, there is always these echoes of everything that happened under the British has also subsequently happened under the Americans, and these echoes and connections, which Hannah brilliantly explored in her play museum. Sorry, it's gone out of my head, the title, but you will say it. Those connections between the past and the present are something of interest to me. So I hope to go back to that project once COVID goes.
Tariq, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was actually right in the middle of a rehearsal process for production at the school that I teach at. Me and two colleagues of mine, we wrote a musical about the life, another actual historical story about someone named Mary Rogers who lived in New York and died under mysterious circumstances. And it was interesting because it became the first tabloid, kind of murder story where people sensationalize things. And so it was this idea of like the news starting to not become the news anymore. And then subsequently people had, used her death as a means to write something else, and no one's ever actually written about her and her life. So we wrote a musical about her, and we were in the middle of rehearsal when suddenly everything shut down, and so the whole production kind of got canceled. And so now we're back in this semester doing it, but now it'll be in a radio play with kind of a video companion piece to it. So it's been a whole new world of theater production. Trying to do a musical over Zoom, I can tell you, is a little difficult. And so we're trying to find our way through that right now.
Hannah, you want to tell us what you were doing and what are you doing now?
Sure. So it was April was supposed to be my month, April 2020. Little did I know. I had my play Museum in Baghdad that Hassan so kindly. I mean, you can imagine how terrified I was when I sent the first draft of that play to my good friend, the Iraqi playwright Hassan Abdulrazzak. I've written a play about the museum in Baghdad. Please don't tell me off. Please don't hate it. Thank goodness. He only had one note, which was, "We don't drink mint tea. We drink cardamom tea." I was like, I'll take that. That's fine. Anyway, so that play had been at the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford-upon-Avon, and it was supposed to be transferring to London to the Kiln Theatre, which used to be called the Tricycle. So that was hugely exciting. And at the same time, I was supposed to have a play opening at Hampstead Theatre, which is just up the road. And I absolutely adored the idea that people who had never heard of me, which is most people in North London, would be like, who's this bitch who's got a play on at two theatres? Like, we've never heard of her. And she's got a play on like one stop on the tube away from each other. But sadly, it wasn't to be. So the show that was supposed to be on at Hampstead was a play called Sleepwalking, which is a two-hander about motherhood. And both shows have been cancelled, and I don't know what's going to happen with them. So that was very sad. And I was very low in April as what I was calling the ghost milestones went past. Tonight should be first night. Tonight should be closing night. But I've had some lovely other opportunities. I've always wanted to write for children. I've got a daughter who's 8 and who's really annoyed that she's never allowed to watch any of my plays because they're not really appropriate. And so I've been working on a couple of things for young people. One was a joyous, I mean, what I've been so impressed by is how innovative people have been. And so one project was a company called Fly High Stories, who are a young people's company here, basically commissioned a bunch of writers to write tiny plays, 5-minute plays that were to be sort of reimaginings of classic stories. And the idea was that you could download them, print them at home, and then perform them at home with your kids, so during lockdown. And so I wrote one for them called Not the Gingerbread Man, which is basically about the fact that we couldn't get any flour. I don't know if you had the same thing in the States, but everyone bought up all the flour and all the thing, everyone was baking. And so my version is, we can't make a gingerbread man because there's no flour in the house. So let's make Rocky Road instead. And it became the Rocky Road person. And because we made a lot of that. Yeah, so I've been doing that. And I also have been doing some adaptations of Greek myths, which has been really lovely. And I'm really enjoying that. So yeah, I've been keeping busy.
Jump in, Mona.
Wait, did you make Rocky Road ice cream, or is it like an English? So what is Rocky Road?
Okay, so Rocky Road is like a,
I should know, but
I'll send you the recipe. So basically what it is
Okay.
it's like a mix up of biscuits with marshmallows and nuts and raisins and chocolate, and you sort of mush it all together and melt it together, and then you stick it in the fridge and you cut it into blocks. It's delicious.
okay,
I'll
yeah,
send you a
send me.
recipe.
Yeah.
I think we're all going to need that recipe.
I know. Let's just put it on a group chat. It's similar, you know, I mean, to everybody's experiences. I was at the Public Theater. We were in our 3rd technical rehearsal for the Vagrant trilogy. You know, in terms of working on it, like with the public, it's been about a 10-year process. So I almost feel like I haven't blacked it out, but it's just like, I think I just went on autopilot. You know, we were all called into the Ansbacher space at the theater. There were 3 plays rehearsing at that time. The Visitor was another one, and nobody knew anything. And at that point, I thought I would be coming back over the weekend for a paper tech. I was like, I'll do it. And here we are. My beloved director, Mark Wing Davey, got COVID. He's better, thank God. But it was very obviously, you know, scary time. And in New York, in particular, that, from what I know, is postponed. And, you know, our set is in there. We've got this like 2,000 pound, the main piece of our set that at different times was a hill in Palestine, and then a sort of ceiling in London, and then the floor of their dwelling in Urge for Going. So it's in there. The cast, somewhere in there, because we were sort of broken up so quickly, we started doing these Friday night Zooms, and we kind of had a good record. And we get together, sometimes there's music, there's poetry, sometimes it's just bitching and complaining about life, but we always read this Naomi Shihab Nye poem called Kindness that I highly recommend. We just read, it's like going to church, and we always read that. But
You need to share that with us.
yeah, I will. Anyway, it's gorgeous to be able to connect with all of them, and we miss each other terribly. And you know, in theater, there's so much. I assume it's the same in the UK, but I know in the States, there's a sense of, you know, I don't know, people can be expendable, or like, look, you know, just, and I try to fight back against that. Also in regard to casting, it's like, no, this person's been with this piece for 9 years. I have a couple of the actors who've been with it since the beginning. And so it's terrible. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's really painful. But I'm grateful for that. So that is postponed. And beyond that, I was supposed to have 2 productions of When We Talk, We Go to War next year. One that's been canceled, and the other, I just haven't heard anything at all. I have a suspicion that that's not happening. So that's, you know, I have a theater company, and we did do a play on Zoom back in August, I think. And I was very, very happy about how that turned out. It was a play, we researched it the way, the joint stock method. And we wrote it, and it's absurd and ridiculous and very heightened. And it's somehow, my director, Scott Illingworth, did an incredible job. And that play is called Beginning Days of True Jubilation. And we do want to do it in person sometime next year. But that was a gift, and it helped to laugh, because, at one point I was like, should we be doing this now? There's so much in the world that it just seems like, is it out of tune? But I think, at least speaking for myself, it was a gift to sit in a rehearsal and be like, how is this ridiculous bit gonna work? How are we gonna do this little shtick, right? This commedia moment. It's a gift. I think the psychic cost to all of us, we just don't even know. Not to sound, because there's so many things in the world that are so literally more important, right, than like my expression as a playwright. But at the same time, it's part of all that. And I do think that, I don't know, I follow Hannah on Twitter, so we get to sort of check in and on each other that way. And you're pretty open about the stuff you go through, and there's, I think there's a lot of us in theater who are becoming adaptable, which is great, but we are grieving. And it's the thing that we want to do the most. And the reason we're in this ridiculous business has been sort of, taken away from us. And I just want to say one last thing, which is, it didn't have to be that way. And it definitely did not have to be that way in the United States.
Thanks, Mona. We have some questions from the folks that are watching on Facebook, and I think we'll shift our conversation to talk about your commissioned work. So Golden Thread has commissioned you to create new work, and that's been, it's one way that Golden Thread, obviously we try to support our artists during this tough time that there have been so many cancellations, but also, as you all mentioned, I think we're all looking for community. We're all looking for opportunities to be creative and to find creative fulfillment. So I think giving an excuse to playwrights to sit down and write via a commission, I think, has been one way for us at Golden Thread to do that. And I want to begin with you, Tariq. So your commission is to write a play about the Black Panthers' time in Algeria. I know that this is early in the process, but is there something you can share with us about that?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating thing to dive into research-wise, because there's some things I kind of knew about, some things I knew a little bit of information about, but the more you dive into it, it's a really fascinating time in Algeria, and specifically in Algiers in the late 60s, early 70s, because basically the general idea is Eldridge Cleaver had to flee the United States, and him and some other prominent Black Panthers found their way to Algiers. And the reason why they went there is because the Algerian Revolution had just ended earlier in the decade, and Algeria, and specifically Algiers, had kind of established itself as this hub for anti-colonial revolutionaries around the world. And so it wasn't just the Black Panthers, but there were many other groups that were all kind of converging onto this city all at the same time. And it's just this fascinating look at how the new Algerian government wanted to establish a governance for its people, but also be like a kind of beacon for other countries around the world to kind of exile their colonial oppressors. And so I'm excited about this play too, because I mean, one, it combines a story from both of my heritages, you know, the Algeria and America. And part of the reason why everybody was coming to Algiers at the time was because of the Algerian Revolution. And as I started researching this, I realized that a lot of my conversations with family growing up had focused largely on the Algerian Civil War, because that had been, you know, so prevalent through my life, that I realized I had never really spoken to my dad or a lot of my relatives about the revolution. You know, like my dad was a child during the revolution. And so I sat down finally and just said, tell me about the revolution. What do you remember? What happened? And he told me these amazing stories that I realized, how have I never heard this before? And so it's been fascinating to go down that line. And so I think the story will have a lot to do with the revolution, and mainly the aftermath of the revolution. And then what the Black Panthers were looking to get from being in Algiers, whether it be information or even resources, because the Algerian government at the time would at some point officially recognize a revolution and give them like office space and a monthly stipend. So you're also getting resources from it. And so I think the play will focus mainly on the Black Panthers looking for that official recognition from the Algerian government, and then finding the similarities between the Algerian Revolution and the revolution that the Black Panthers are trying to start here in the United States. Because the more you go into it, the more you realize that there were many similarities in terms of the treatment from each person's oppressor, and then ultimately what they were looking to do, and also what some of the roadblocks or the pitfalls were, because as Algerians, we definitely had a lot of pitfalls after the revolution there, and I think that there were some things that the Black Panthers might have learned from that, maybe. So that's why I've been really excited about it, just for the research, and also an excuse to pester all my relatives and the people I know for stories, and even my dad's old friends from college, because it turns out that Eldridge Cleaver announces to the world in July of 1969 at the University of Algiers that he's now in Algeria. And I did the math and I realized, wait, my dad began his undergraduate studies at the University of Algeria the next month. And so him and some of his good friends from college were kind of in the midst of everything during that. And so they've been some really good, a lot of good help and stories have been coming from that.
That's great. That sounds fascinating. And then the three of you, Hannah, Mona, and Hassan, you guys decided to collaborate on one play. And I just want to be clear that this isn't something Golden Thread asked or suggested, but that the three of you suggested and are pursuing. So who wants to speak on behalf of your mutual project?
Go on, Hassan.
All right. Well, we're still very early days. So we've actually had our first meeting today, just discussing broad ideas. And Mona had the idea of having this sheet of Google sheet that we are sharing and putting in kind of like a collage of ideas. So everybody's just putting in things that are attracting them, stories that they've come across or specific moments, and just kind of we're building it up into layers now, and what our subsequent meeting will be building up on these ideas and trying to find where the connections are. And then Hannah had today this wonderful idea of just like kind of having almost like a baton being passed on. So maybe one of us would start with writing something, and then somebody else would react to it and take maybe a character or a moment and expand them, or take something into the next story. And so we would write 3 stories that have a kind of either it's going to be a thematic link or just a basic link, but we're not wedded that it has to be completely synchronized. I think we can each bring our own kind of interest to it.
And go ahead.
Yeah, and I've had, so I'm, so far, this is very early. I mean, I'm sharing something that will probably change completely by the time we get through the process. But I was interested in two areas of, one was an incident that sort of happened to me where I visited I was visiting a town called Dorset in the south of England. And I met a group of people who I thought would be sort of very liberal, very left-wing. And I was quite shocked by their anti-immigrant stance. And this was post-Brexit. And Dorset is not one of those places that is typically talked about when people talk about Brexit. They talk about working class northern towns where people didn't have jobs and so on. Dorset is actually quite wealthy, and a lot of people who live there have money. So I'm interested in that dynamic of people who have. And then on a completely different subject, I don't know which one I'm going to pursue. I'm also interested in people who come back from the dead, people who experience near-death or have death experiences and are resuscitated and being brought back. And now there is a whole science to that, where people are can be brought back, and there are machines that are being made and so on that allows, so the moment when you die is not really a final moment. It's a moment where you can be brought back from. And there's something about that, a metaphor somewhere is sitting in that idea that I might explore.
So maybe it's somebody who has a near-death experience in Dorset.
Yeah.
Combining both ideas.
Yes.
Does Hannah, Mona, do you guys want, we have one more question from our Facebook audience, but I want to give Hannah and Mona a chance if you have something about this collaboration that you want to comment on, or idea that you want to share.
I'll just say that, all my ideas are very in their infancy, but what an amazing opportunity you've given us, Taranj. Seriously, as writers, you never, ever get a message from someone saying, we'd like to commission you. Do you want to have a think about what you might like to? It just never happens. You have to go begging, and dance and buy wine and be charming. And so, and to have the opportunity to write with these two other writers who are so brilliant, whose work I respect so much and who I love. And writing is such an isolated thing, so to be able to kind of have particularly now as well, we don't even leave the house for meetings anymore, so to be able to have conversations and to share creative ideas with these two, it's just, I hope Taranj, how grateful we are and how exciting it is for all of us. It's really wonderful. Thank goodness for Golden Thread.
I'm glad to hear it. So Mona, our next question from the audience, I think, is directed at you, because you began working as an actor and then sort of started writing. And the question is, can you share a time you really resonated with or saw yourself in a character or play on stage, a formative moment that brought you to writing the plays you write? So a moment as an actor that then shaped you to become a playwright.
In my case, there's sort of a bridge period, I guess you could say, because I had studied very diligently. Whatever, my undergrad was a sort of high pressure program or something, acting program. So people got cut, we thought it was the end of the world if that happened. But I thought I wanted to be sort of a classical regional theater actor. So I wanted to play like Major Barbara and things like that. And then we started doing improv, I guess my senior year, and I just took to it, right? And eventually I got into sort of the improv and then kind of high pressure comedy scene in LA. And I was in something called the Sunday Company at the Groundlings, where it was just, you know, it's funny when I think about that now, because in the States, the Liz Lerman method of feedback and all of that we do here, that's really quite kind and very artist focused. That process was much more, at least then, it was much more like, you know, you'd present a scene and the person running the Sunday Company would be like, get off the stage and don't ever let me see that again, you know? So it was very, you know, or you'd get it in the show and it would bomb. So I learned how to do that. And that was really, that middle period, what I realized was, oh, I don't want to be the one doing this anymore. I want to hand it off to other people. And then I had written this two-hander with another woman. And when a friend of mine said, can I take that to a director's lab and work on it? And I said, you mean like a real play? Like not us in it? He's like, yeah. I said, oh, that'd be great. And I think that's when I just literally went, oh, I'm so happy to hand this off to somebody. But it's always, it informs all of my writing, I think. You just kind of can't shake it, for better or worse, right? The being an actor and the way that I've also just feel lucky being able to observe really great directors, among them Evren Ochkin from Golden Thread, now at OSF, Mark Wing Davey, Mimi O'Donnell, like watching people who are at a very high level speak to actors into the heart of the moment. I'm like, oh, that's A, why I wasn't a very good actor, and B, this is really good for me to understand now as I'm writing, because that director picked up on the turn that this character's made that I didn't even realize I had written in there. And they're solidifying what this blueprint that I've put down. So I don't know if that answers that question, but it wasn't a character. I guess I should say that. It wasn't like I saw a character and went, oh my God, this means I want to write. I think I just wanted to be listened to. You know, I was like, listen to me. You know, some child impulse that probably should have gotten worked out, but it didn't. So, you know, here we all are. But Hannah, you said something earlier today, I feel like you must say in this context about your characters. It was so brilliant. It was so great.
That's so not fair.
I will. You don't have to say it.
No, I will say it. But what I will say first, before I say that, is that on the question of a character, really important moment for me was, I think it was around 2000, 2001. I went to see a play called 9 Parts of Desire, written by Heather Raffo, performed by Heather Raffo, and she came to London and did it at the Bush. I had never seen an Arab actress on stage who was so brilliant and who did all these different characters and all these women I knew, and I'd never seen it done before. And I went, oh my gosh, it's allowed. Like, I'm so grateful to Heather. Yeah, that was a really key moment for me. So what I said earlier was, we were talking about characters, and I said, basically, I can't sort of tell you in advance who my characters are going to be, because basically they're all me or my dad or my mum or my granny. Which is true, because what I do is I do the research. I work really hard. I do the research. I know the situation that I'm setting up, but then I sort of try and put myself in the shoes of the characters and imagine what I would do if I was them. So it's not as lazy as it sounds. I then realized after I said this, and Hassan and Mona were laughing at me, I was like, no, that sounds terrible, doesn't it? Or really narcissistic, but hopefully not that, hopefully just empathetic.
Yes, I think we all get inspiration from our family, and not from our political leaders. So I want to, in our final few minutes, I want to throw in the election and Brexit, and I don't know what's happening. How are folks coping with this situation? Has everyone voted already? Or Mona and Tariq?
Early voting doesn't start until tomorrow in New York, but I have my plan. So on Tuesday, I'll be heading out to vote.
Yeah,
I mean, it seems
earlier.
appropriate
Mhm,
for
go
this
ahead.
conversation. It seems appropriate to say that all the ways of this anxiety in this country about ballots and corruption. I mean, I think if I'm looking around this circle itself, right, where most of our families come from, or we ourselves come from, are often the places that the Western world likes to look at to say, oh, well, that's just, look at that corruption. And people are very scared, as you know, Taraj, you know, and I think there's a great deal of anxiety. I've definitely got a circle of friends who are like, I can't don't ask me anything till after.
Yeah, I remember when Trump was elected I don't know, when he was elected, there was like a little gathering of theater artistic directors in the Bay Area to figure out, oh my God, what happened? What should our response be? And I was like, you know, to actually be aligned with your political leader is so rare and such a privilege. You know, most leaders are corrupt and not popularly elected and not, you know, all the things that we take for granted with our democracy. And so, you know, I said, I come from Iran, a country where, you know, many in the country do not identify with their leadership. So not identifying with our political leadership is part of our daily life.
Part of the problem too of the last 4 years is just the idea of not knowing where anything is going, or not knowing what's going to happen in any given circumstance. Like I think about during Trump's actual inauguration, I was actually in Algeria. I brought my wife had come for the first time to go see Algeria, and we came back the week before that Muslim ban had been put into effect. And so I remember flying home thinking, like, they're saying this is going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen when I land. You know, I have a US passport, but I also have an Algerian passport. So I don't know. And so I think that's kind of a microcosm of what the problem has been the last 4 years, is that nothing is really known about what's going to happen or how things are going to happen. And I think that's really what the anxiety is. But the thing I do keep in mind to keep myself positive and uplifting is that as much as bad as this was in 2016, a positive note is how few people did vote in 2016, because you don't really need to overturn any Trump votes to vote him out. You just need people to finally feel empowered enough to leave their home to go cast a vote. And as long as that happens, I think we might be okay. But, you know, that's always still a big if. But I don't think we need to have some of the most diehard of his Kool-Aid drinkers see the light in order to rectify what's the situation there. So I try to keep that as a positive in the back of my mind. I don't know if that actually translates as well.
We appreciate that, Tariq. Hannah and Hassan, are you feeling the impact of Brexit at all? The changes that are happening?
Brexit, in a way, somewhat disappeared from the headlines. And I mean, we were like Brexit every day. It was up to COVID. And that is really worrying, because we don't really, it's what is being done in the background on Brexit is really worrying. Like what the effects of what will come out will probably not be as thoroughly debated as if we didn't have the COVID, because it really has receded from the headlines. So we are looking. It looks like we're heading towards a no deal Brexit. That's definitely happening, and that was before a nightmare scenario. That even the conservatives, even the group who are pro Brexit were often going, no, this is not going to happen. We will find So we are now like, they're like, oh yes, yeah, it's gonna happen, you know, we're gonna have a no deal Brexit. And it's like, wow, that was the thing, that was the precipice we were all fearing. But COVID has somehow made it less. So it seems it's people are so worried about that they are that they don't see that this is going to be a real cliff we're jumping off. So it has made matters worse in that regard.
From my point of view, I think the biggest sort of legacy of Brexit has been, and also the government that we have and the way they've behaved, is that it feels like, and I think you probably echo this in the States, is that there seems to be permission for people to be racist. So people who probably were always racist, but kept it to themselves, now it's okay. And, you know, the incidence of you know, racial abuse that people are suffering is disgusting. And I think that the legacy of Brexit, we don't quite know yet, Hassan, what it's going to be for us every day, because of course the deals haven't been reached. But I mean, even on a personal level, so I can't talk about this very much yet, but I have been offered a post in the States, and it took a really long time for that to be agreed, and I didn't know why that was. And now I know it's because that UK won't be in the EU when this, you know, when this thing happens. So it makes it really complicated. And I could have not got the job as a result of that, if it, you know, so I think it will have really big repercussions on people's lives, and we don't even know what they are yet, like day to day, which is worrying. But yeah, but the whole permissive racism thing is just distressing and awful.
Yeah, in the Bay Area, we've seen a surprisingly high number of anti-Armenian violent acts. The school and church there was graffiti written on the walls, and then the school hall was burned. They said it was arson. So that's really shocking to me in this day and age in the Bay Area too. So yeah, it's not just anti-Muslim. I think you're right that everyone feels like they have a carte blanche to express whatever hatred they have towards anybody in ways that were completely unacceptable before. We are almost at time. Any last comments or words of wisdom you want to share?
I mean, I'm really grateful to you, Taraj, as well. I just want to say that you and Golden Thread and you've kind of held a lot of us together and held us up. And I'm excited for this next part of your life.
Yes, yes. Maybe one day I'll be a full-time playwright. Tariq, yeah.
So this commission has been a bit of a lifesaver. Right when New York fully, like, really locked down and became the epicenter of the virus in the world, my second child was born, and so we had a baby through the height of the pandemic, and so dealing with that, and then after he was born, and just dealing with having a second kid in the middle of all this, I was feeling very very uncreative, you know. It was very hard, and then I felt awful about myself, as like, what kind of writer are you that you can't write right now? Which, now that I'm past it a little bit, I realize is ridiculous. But then when I got your email about this, like, hey, what do you think of this idea? It really kind of helped me out of that hole, that like creative block of a kind of hole I dug myself into. So I was very, very appreciative of your commission and just Golden Thread in general.
Well, thank you. Thank you to you for your writing and for your talent and for your creativity and for sharing it with us. I want to thank HowlRound for providing this free live stream service. I want to thank Wendy Reyes, our live stream tech, and Linda Giron, who's minding the Facebook live stream and sending me questions. join us next time for our third No Summary conversation with the team of Golden Thread Fairy Tale Players. That will be on November 6th, and that will focus on theater for young audiences and how representation matters even more for children. Thank you so much for being with us. Check out our programming on goldenthread.org and join our email list if you are not on it yet. Thank you so much.